Hello, I'm Jenny Larkins in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support. Welcome to the Back to School training for the kindergarten entry screen. This training is not one of the case screen required training videos. It's supplemental, provided to give you some current information, especially about changes that are in place this year as a result of the COVID pandemic. We'll begin the training with a discussion of the most recent case screen decision made by the Kentucky Board of Education. We'll follow that with a look at the general timeline we'll be following this year and an overview of what information is collected as part of the screener. We're going to spend most of our time talking about the tasks that must be completed in your work as a case screen coordinator. Then we'll finish with a brief discussion on data reporting. At their August 6th board meeting, the Kentucky Board of Education discussed the kindergarten screener. They were made aware that there is no virtual option for the screener for those students who aren't returning to school in person, and of the extra time it's going to take to implement the health safety protocols and for sanitizing manipulatives between students. And as a result, they approved a waiver of the kindergarten screen administration and reporting windows set in regulation. Now, I want to make sure I'm really clear about what this waiver means because we had a little misunderstanding about it. The board did not approve a waiver of the screener itself. We do believe it's important for teachers to have the information they collect during the screen to help make important instructional decisions. What the board did approve is a waiver of the regulation timeframe so that those boundaries of 15 days prior through the 30th instructional day after the first day of school have been removed. Again, this doesn't mean that you won't screen students. It means that you can start screening students anytime now, and that you'll have more time than you usually have to screen them after school starts. The October 15th deadline for entering all data has also been waived to align with the extended administration window, and the December public reporting could also be pushed forward. The board also granted authority to the commissioner to approve exemptions for schools who aren't able to screen students because they do not attend in person. With this board approval, you're going to have some flexibility for screening this year with more time to screen students who eventually come back into school for school. Let's look at that more specifically. I'll repeat that the board didn't waive the screener itself. If or when your students return to school in person, they should be screened. But we know that many of our districts are beginning the year virtually, or at least with some amount of NTI, and may not be able to screen their kindergartners. How's that going to be handled? Well, we're developing exemption or waiver processes for those situations. Right now, you might not know yet when your students will return to school in person. And of course, none of us knows how the pandemic is going to unfold, but it's still too early to be thinking about exemptions or waivers. The kindergarten screen is available for schools to use, and it's going to still be available for quite some time, possibly into early 2021. If you have small numbers of students who don't return to school in person by the time case screen closes, you'll be able to request a non-participation for them in SDRR as you do with other medical and extraordinary circumstances each year. If it turns out that you have entire schools who were unable to get their students screened, the district superintendent will be able to request a waiver from the commissioner. That's one of the things the board approved. So no worries about this. We still have plenty of time for screening, and later in the year or early in 2021, we'll have exemption processes in place for you if needed. Now let's look at a visual representation of what we've been discussing. The regulation that defines the case screen implementation sets a very specific window for administering the screen, one you're all familiar with. Each school has 15 calendar days prior to the first day of school through the 30th instructional day after. Staff then have an additional 15 instructional days after that to get their data entered, but not later than October 15th. And finally, we publicly report the data in December each year. Looking at the first timeline, we see all of that reflected. Based on the waiver just granted by the board, a few areas in our timeline for 2020 are going to look different, starting with the second arrow that represents the screening window. As a result of the waiver, you're not bound by that regulatory window, so you can begin screening students at any time. Extending the window could also mean that if you start school virtually, but students return in person in October or November, for example, you could screen them in October or November. On to the next arrow. The opening of the OMS isn't linked to the regulation, but we're going to see a change there also. The OMS opened on its usual time frame, August 6th this year, but unlike in other years, it's going to remain open beyond October 15th to accommodate the extended screening window and data entry period. That means screening data don't have to be entered by October 15th as you're accustomed to. It will be open as long as the case screen is open, which could be several months, possibly even into 2021. You see on the 4th and 5th arrows that the deadlines for data entry and public reporting of the data are to be determined. The board didn't set specific deadlines for these, and at this time, KDE hasn't set a deadline either. The case screen, again, could be open into early 2021. Our office will be monitoring the situation and will make those decisions later in the school year and communicate them to you. As a quick review, we're collecting 3 pieces of information as part of the kindergarten screen. The screen itself includes the core assessment, which is that information collected during the one-on-one session with the student, and the self-help social-emotional scales information that we collect from the parent or guardian. The core assessment data are what is used to provide the student's readiness level of ready, ready with enrichments, or ready with interventions. The data gathered from both of those components are entered into the Brigance Online Management System, or what we call the OMS. The third piece of information we collect, the child's prior setting, is also a parent-reported component that is entered in Infinite Campus, or IC. In typical years, we collect the screen information only during the screening window, but with the waiver we discussed, the screen information can be collected anytime. Now we'll move on to the steps you'll need to take to prepare for the kindergarten screener, such as determining which students to screen, reviewing resources, and providing training. First, you'll determine which students to screen. That's going to be determined by whether your students are returning to school in person, virtually, or a combination of both. If students return to school in person, you should screen them, of course following the safety expectations and best practices provided by your local health department and the COVID-19 guidance that KDE has available on our website. If the student attends in person only part-time, such as on an AB schedule where the student attends in person on Mondays and Wednesdays and virtually the other days or similar, that student should be scheduled for the screener on one of his or her in-person days. But what about those students who are returning fully virtually? There is no virtual administration option for the kindergarten screener. Students who are not physically present are not able to be screened. But currently across the state, many students have been taking the case screen. In some situations, when kindergartners are coming in to register or maybe to pick up their Chromebooks or iPads for remote learning or meet their teachers, schools are screening the students at that time. But the decision to bring students into the building for the administration of the case screen should be made in conjunction with elementary school administration, central office staff, and local health department. These decisions should be made in accordance with local health department and state government guidelines at the time of testing. Safety expectations provided by KDE and your local health department should be followed during administration. When students do return in person, who is screened? Well, all new and returning kindergarten students attending school in person should be screened. This includes repeating kindergarten students. Students who've been retained in kindergarten will populate in the OMS, and KDE will look for screen data entered for them. This is a change from previous years. Last year, screening repeating kinders was optional, but from this year forward, it is required. You'll also screen incoming kindergarten students with special needs in most cases. Most of the questions we receive on this topic involve nonverbal students. After consulting with our accommodation specialist and information in the Brigance manual, our guidance is to at least attempt the screener, maybe having someone familiar with the child's communication methods to help you. If a student can't answer something, just mark the data sheet appropriately and move on. It's important to remember that this is a screener and not an assessment with accountability. It's okay if a student can't respond correctly to every prompt. Teachers can still gain a lot of valuable information during the screen. Now, having said that, you and your teachers know your students best. If there are reasons you believe the student shouldn't participate in the screener, you'll be able to submit a non-participation request and it will be reviewed. As a reminder, later in the school year, for those students who weren't able to be screened because they didn't attend school in person, we are developing an exemption process for those students. After those decisions about screening have been made, you'll need to communicate your expectations to your staff. This might not be something that you're able to do right now. As we know, the pandemic situation is evolving, and tomorrow could look very different than today. But when the time comes, you, as the case screen coordinator, will probably want to provide some sort of administration and data entry expectations specific to your district, mainly for the purpose of keeping track of the screenings and monitoring the data entry. And then, of course, you'll want to communicate those expectations to your staff. As part of preparing, you'll also want to review the case screen resources available to you. Many of the resources shown here are actively linked for you. The case screen implementation guide includes primarily information on KDE policy regarding the case screen. The March Refresher webcast is hosted each year and provides updates and new information. The primary audience for the webcast are the kindergarten screen district contacts and district trainers. In fact, the webcast is required viewing for all experienced district trainers. The Case Screen Update is a newsletter distributed to Case Screen district contacts approximately once during most months, but that could be different. It includes important dates and information needed to manage the Case Screen program. It's very important that you don't move that email to a folder without reading it. All important information is going to be communicated through that update. The Prior Settings video provides information and instruction for collecting prior setting information and entering data into Infinite Campus. This video is required annual viewing for anyone involved in the collection and entering of prior settings data. The Brigance OMS training videos are required for anyone who will be entering data into the OMS. And the Case Screen webpage on the KDE website contains lots of valuable information and resources. The DAC information or DAC info email address here on the slide is monitored daily. If you email a question to this address, someone will be able to assist you. An additional task in preparing for the case screen is the training of staff. Everyone who is a trainer, who will administer a screener, or who will enter data, so basically everyone involved with case screen, will need to be trained each year. All district training is given by a district trainer. If your district trainer is new this year, he or she should have participated in a 6-hour training provided by Curriculum Associates. If the district trainer is experienced and has received the 6-hour training in previous years, then only the refresher webcast is required. The district trainer will then provide training to new and experienced teachers as well as data entry staff. Those specific requirements for training are shown here on the slide. Materials for training teachers and data entry staff are provided on the Brigance password protected site at Brigance linked from the Kentucky case screen page. Details about how to access those materials were shared in the July case screen update, but please email us if you have any difficulty. Note that some training is typically required to be taken in a face-to-face setting, noted here on the slide, but for 2020, virtual training can be substituted. We'll discuss more about the OMS and IC weekly data exchanges in a bit, but for now, Know that it is important to set up your homerooms correctly in Infinite Campus to make sure that your students and teachers are populated in the OMS. We understand that you might not be the person who enrolls students or sets up homerooms in IC. And if you aren't, you'll need to collaborate with the person who is in charge of that so that they understand the required enrollment data standards that allow us to extract student and teacher information correctly. We've provided some guidance for you in the implementation guide that's linked on this slide. Now we'll move on to the actual administration of the screen and collection of parent-reported data, beginning with the prior setting information. The K-Screen regulation mandates that districts collect information regarding a child's early learning experiences during the year prior to their starting kindergarten. This information is typically obtained from the child's parent or guardian, but preschool and Head Start rosters can also be a source of information. Prior settings examples, such as state-funded preschool, Head Start, and child care and home, are noted for you here on the slide. The other category is used for settings like a relative outside the home or a private sitter or a neighbor or nanny who's not operating a licensed child care center or any other childhood setting that doesn't fit into one of those named categories. This other category will also be used for the repeating kindergarten students. Another parent-collected piece of information is the self-help and social-emotional skills form. In typical years, this can only be gathered during the screening window, but this year that window is waived, so you can go ahead and collect it any time. You should make every effort to obtain the forms from families, but eventually, if the form hasn't been completed by the family after you've made repeated attempts to obtain it, the teacher can complete the form. Every item on the form must be answered and entered into the OMS. If an item is left blank, the OMS won't provide a score for the self-help and social-emotional scales. As a reminder, aggregate self-help social-emotional data are publicly reported, but they don't factor into the child's readiness performance level. We've reviewed the family reported components of the K-Screen, so now let's move on to the core assessment. That's that one-on-one interactive session with a student where the teacher is collecting the information. It's important that you have all your materials gathered and ready to use prior to inviting the student to join you. Most of what you're going to need has been provided in your classroom kit, but teachers will need to provide some classroom materials such as picture books and pencil and paper. Occasionally, you'll need to order or replace those classroom kits. If your enrollment increases and your school needs to add a new kindergarten class and teacher, KDE will purchase a one-time new kit for that new classroom. Contact us through the DAC email address shown on the slide in that case. If you need to replace lost or damaged materials for an existing classroom, or you just want an extra kit, you'll have to submit a school purchase order to Curriculum Associates. Remember that only staff who have been trained by a district trainer can administer the core assessment. Staff administering the screen should also be very familiar with the front matter in the Brigance manual, as well as information in the implementation guide. As a reminder, there is no virtual administration of the K-Screen. Students must be physically present to be able to screen them. For those of you with students attending school in person or having students come into school to be screened, you'll want to follow state and local health department guidance for preventing or reducing the risk of the coronavirus. The list you see on the slide here may not be exhaustive, and a lot of the recommendations here are what you're already going to be implementing for everything you're doing at school. The primary concern specific to the screener is the use of the Brigance manipulatives and picture books. Manipulatives should be sanitized between each student use, and for those teacher-provided materials, items should be used only once per student. As I have mentioned, please abide by your health department guidelines. Now that the Brigance OMS is open, there are some important tasks to complete. But before we discuss those, Let's talk about how to access your OMS user account. The first thing you need to know is that your username will look different this year. In the past, for most users, your username was simply your district email address. Beginning this year, your username is your district email address with your district or school location ID as an appendix. If you have a district level role with K-Screen, your appendix will be underscore and your 3-digit code, the district code. If your role is at the school level, your appendix will be underscore and the 6-digit school code. We've given you those examples here on the slide. If you don't know your district and school codes, they can be found in the school report card. All staff who were listed in the staff file that you submitted in June should have a user account in the OMS. Teachers who weren't included in that staff file and newly hired teachers entered in IC will automatically be assigned a user account during those weekly file exchanges if they don't already have one. For administrators and data entry staff who don't have kindergarten homerooms and weren't submitted in the staff file, the K-Screen coordinator with an administrator role in the OMS can create new user accounts for them. It's important that you enter district email addresses correctly when adding new users. Misspelled names or missing periods can create issues. You're not going to receive login credentials automatically. To log into your 2020 account, use the Forgot Password feature on the Brigance OMS login screen that we've linked here for you. You'll be prompted to enter your name, your username and email address. Enter the district email address with the appendix in the username field and just the district email address in the email field. Next, enter the verification code and click that orange Submit button. If you just select Enter on the keyboard instead of clicking Submit, the system is going to generate an error message that says User Not Found. Once you click Submit, the system will send you an email with temporary login credentials. If the message doesn't show up quickly, check junk and clutter email folders. If you follow these directions and still have any difficulties accessing your account, please contact Brigance Technical Support, and we've provided that contact information for you here on the slide. Once you've logged in, you'll want to check your populated files. Do you see all your students? Do you have any missing schools or teachers? And if so, what should you do? The answer is start with Infinite Campus. Almost every time an issue with missing students is related to something being incorrectly entered or not entered in IC at the school or district level. There is no way for KDE or district staff to manually add students into the Brigance OMS. As students enroll and are assigned an IC to a homeroom with the required homeroom code, the student data should automatically populate into the Brigance OMS during the weekly data exchange, but only if the data have been accurately and correctly entered in IC. You can usually expect to see most dates reflected by Wednesday of each week. Your newly enrolled students sometimes won't be visible in the OMS for up to 2 weeks. So if you make corrections or enrolled new students in IC on Friday, you're probably not going to see those changes in the OMS that following Monday. You should allow at least until Wednesday of the following week and possibly up to 2 weeks to see those changes. In the K-Screen implementation guide, we've listed the most common Infinite Campus errors that result in missing students. For example, the student might have an enrollment type of N because the student only came in for special ed services last year, but the enrollment type wasn't changed to P for primary enrollment for the student's kindergarten entry. We're only pulling kindergarten students that have an enrollment type of primary. So if the enrollment is N, they're not going to pull in our weekly data pulls. And there are several other common errors to look for in that implementation guide that we've linked several times here. Occasionally, you might also have problems in the exchange related to teacher data. Possibly a teacher's name has been changed, but that hasn't been updated completely in IC, or they've used an incorrect email address, such as they've used their personal email address in IC instead of the district email address. Or a student hasn't been assigned correctly to a teacher. You're going to see that teacher unknown in the Brigance OMS if that happens. So please verify that all that kind of information is also entered correctly. So hopefully that discussion helps you understand the connection between the IC and OMS. It's very important that you understand how those data exchanges work, that you understand how critical it is to get things right in Infinite Campus if you're going to avoid problems in the OMS, and that you understand that there's very little we can correct in the OMS itself. Most of the issues in the OMS have to be resolved on your end by correcting what's incorrect in Infinite Campus. And again, when you do have to make those corrections, remember that it could be a week or more before those changes are reflected in the OMS. When you've made your corrections in Infinite Campus and your teachers and students are displayed in the OMS, you'll need to enter the data. You're adding core assessment data and self-help social emotional data in the OMS. One important note here is that you must click Submit to Score after entering data for both of those components. When KDE extracts reports from the OMS, we aren't gathering each individual screener data. We pull an aggregate of all students in the school. If you have only selected Save on a student's screen data, that student's data is not going to load into the reports that we pull, and it will appear as if the student hasn't been screened at all. So you must click that Submit to Score button if you want your student reflected in the school screening report. You'll also need to enter the prior settings information that you collected from parents. That information is entered in IC. Any staff entering data are required to view the prior settings instructional video on the case screen page of the KDE website. When entering the data, be sure that the start date is 1 year prior to the first day of kindergarten. For example, if your first day of school is August 24th this school year, you'll want your start date to be August 24th, 2019. You can look to see if data have been entered by running a report in Infinite Campus. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's talk about data checks. One of the big responsibilities you have as the case screen coordinator is to make sure that all data have been entered and are showing up on the reports. So once data entry has started for your district, you'll need to perform some routine data checks, probably weekly. There are 2 reports in the Brigance OMS to use for checking data entry. The Group Screening Summary Report lists every student with submitted data. And remember again, that's submitted, not just saved. You'll also check for students with duplicate entries. Students should only have 1 entry. If duplicates appear, delete the duplicate entry in the Brigance OMS. Detailed instructions can be found on the Brigance OMS training site. The Screened Not Screened report lists every student in the school or district, and it shows if students have core assessment data entered. Again, data that have been saved but not submitted are not going to show up on this report. You'll also want to check your prior settings report. There's an ad hoc report in IC called Early Learning Prior Settings, which is most useful when it's exported as a CSV file. To search for students with no prior setting data, set filters in the spreadsheet and search for blanks in the Type field. The students then displayed have no prior setting data entered. Please note that this report will show every kindergarten student in the district, including those who have been retained. Retained or repeating kindergarten students must also have prior setting data. Remember to use the Other category for those students. The screen data you enter in the OMS and prior setting information in IC will eventually be publicly reported. With the board waiving the reporting time frame, that probably won't happen in December as it typically does. We will communicate new dates with you when those decisions are made. Once the data are reported, you'll find results in the supplemental data section of Open House on the KDE website. That wraps up our kindergarten screen information. If you have any questions or need assistance in any way, please reach out to us using the contact information here on this slide. And as they apply to your work, be sure to watch our other back-to-school trainings on Access, ACT, alternate assessment, and end-of-course assessments for early graduate students. Thank you and have a most wonderful school year.